The left wasn't as crazy under Bush and Obama. They just weren't. And I was not going to hold my tongue when they went to places where, I mean, you know, college kids marching for Hamas. Don't tell me there hasn't been a change.
Right.
And the victim culture, the cancel culture, she's not part of what they suspect she might be, sort of a stealth version of the worst excesses of the left. I said there's a coalition of Trump voters, people who really like him. They certainly are those. And then there's people who don't necessarily like him that much, but they still think he's less crazy.
That's not how it played out. Instead of backing off, they doubled down, relentlessly. The media's obsession with tearing down Trump has blinded them to their own contradictions. But Bill Maher wasn't about to let that slide. He called it out, plain and simple. No sugarcoating, no spin, just facts, delivered with the kind of clarity that cuts through the noise. And yes, we've got the receipts. Now things are about to get really interesting. Maher's latest target? MSNBC's very own Joe Scarborough. Scarborough tried to nudge the conversation, hoping Maher would unleash on the GOP, but Maher didn't. Take the bait. Instead, he flipped the script, shining a harsh light on Scarborough himself and the Democratic establishment he defends. One sharp, unexpected comment, and just like that, the tables turned. Take a listen.
Take a listen.
How long have we
After all
been
these
doing
years,
this? I'm serious. What's it been?
I don't know. Well, you were on Politically Incorrect, right? That was the 90s when you were a congressman from Florida.
The 90s, exactly. And first show I was on, this guy stands up and points at me. He goes, "You're a racist."
Who's that? Who was it?
I forget who it was. And then you defended
me. Did he
me.
mean it?
Of course he meant it. But
well, he's a comedian.
I was from the South. He's a comedian. I wasn't insulted by it. I bet you stood up for me.
Well, that is a fundamental problem we've had for a long time. Well, two problems. One, there are racists in the Republican Party,
now,
as many people have. Well, I mean, there always have been. There used to be more in the Democratic Party. They were the Dixiecrats. But as someone once said, you know, is every Republican a racist? Of course not. But if you're a racist, that is the party you're going to gravitate toward. But also there is a big problem of calling every Republican a racist and calling everything racism.
If you're not familiar with the backstory, here's a quick rundown. Joe Scarborough was once a Republican congressman, but over the years, his views shifted more to the left, though he doesn't openly admit it. These days, it's pretty clear he leans toward the Democratic side. In the clip we mentioned earlier, Scarborough tried to steer the conversation in a predictable direction, accusing Republicans of racism. But Bill Maher didn't go along with it. Instead, he called out the Democrats for having their own issues with racial double standards. That's when Scarborough started to look uneasy. But Maher didn't back down. In fact, he pressed the issue even more.
The left wasn't as crazy under Bush and Obama. They just weren't. And I was not going to hold my tongue.
Back in the days of Bush and Obama, the political left wasn't nearly as extreme as it is now. You can really see how much things have changed. And Bill Maher wasn't about to stay silent. He was just getting started. Meanwhile, Joe Scarborough looked clearly uncomfortable, caught off guard by where the conversation was heading. You could tell
he didn't see it coming. Scarborough thought Maher was still the same guy who'd leap at any chance to bash Republicans. But that version of Bill Maher, long gone. Today's Maher is sharper, freer, and unafraid to call out anyone, left or right. And that independence clearly threw Scarborough off. He squirmed, flashed a few forced smiles, and tried to play it cool. But Maher wasn't letting up. He pushed past the usual talking points, making it crystal clear. He's not playing for either team. Then came the moment that really turned up the heat. Those campus protests supporting Hamas? Maher wasn't having it. He called it out directly. Don't tell me there hasn't been a shift. He slammed the rise of victim culture, cancel culture, and what he sees as the radical drift of the modern left. Scarborough tried to interject, tried being the key word. I agree there's been a change, on the left, he admitted cautiously. But let's talk about Hamas. and let's talk about the college campuses. He launched into a defensive flashback, remembering his early days on Scarborough country. In 2003, pointing out the anti-Semitism brewing at Columbia and other elite schools. But he quickly tried to reframe it. "I don't think it's rooted in anti-Semitism," he said. "I think it's anti-colonialism, a misguided view that Israelis are colonizers." That's when Maher dropped the line that left the room still. "Somebody should really tell them that European colonialists killed 6 million of them not too long ago." It was a gut punch of reality, and Scarborough knew it. You could tell he wasn't ready to defend the direction the conversation was heading. He tried to pivot, shifting to broader history, downplaying the relevance of modern colonialism, but the damage was done. Maher had already exposed the uncomfortable contradictions. And Scarborough? He couldn't change the subject fast enough.
Switched gears. This time, he brought up anti-Semitism and colonialism, typical tactics to change the subject. And that's the problem. Whenever someone starts holding the political left accountable, the same thing tends to happen. They dodge the issue, shift the focus, or try to rewrite the rules. But the rise in anti-Semitism didn't just begin under President Biden. It's been building for a while, fueled by confusing messages and extreme views from the far left. Just look at some of today's college campuses. Certain student groups have shown public support for violent groups after the October 7th attacks. Then, you have members of Congress like Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar, who have made strong anti-Israel comments that many say cross the line into anti-Semitism, and when they're criticized, they often defend themselves by calling it a fight for justice or anti-colonialism. The result? A troubling trend where anti-Semitism is not only overlooked, it's being repackaged as a political opinion. Bill Maher sees exactly what's going on. Scarborough, on the other hand, doesn't seem to.
It's anti-historical. The Jews were there 700 years before Islam even existed, or more, probably 1700 years, but certainly the temple was built a long time before Islam came along in the 7th century, 6th century. There's always been a presence there. There was a UN resolution that said divide the land. One group went with it. One group never has agreed to it. And let's be honest, a lot of that is because the says Jews bad. I think we could solve this if that wasn't, if that wasn't a big part of like why they hate having them in that region. Most people around the world that have territorial disputes, it doesn't go on forever.
This was, without question, one of the most straightforward and honest takes on the Israel-Palestine conflict we've heard in a long time. Bill Maher didn't sugarcoat anything. He laid out the facts clearly, without trying to push a political agenda. If more major news outlets presented it this way, maybe we wouldn't see so many people joining protests based more on emotion than real understanding. But here's the reality. Most of the media won't touch it. Whether it's fear of criticism, political bias, or something deeper, they often avoid showing the full story. Instead, they air short clips and simplified versions that stir emotions but leave out important context. The result? A lot of young Americans are getting a one-sided view. They're chanting slogans without knowing the full history or what's really at stake. They're being led by emotion in a situation that calls for careful thought, not media hype. And Maher? He pulled back the curtain and showed just how harmful that kind of reporting can be.
We could talk about Israel for the entire time here, but I want to get back to you haven't changed. So you consider yourself a liberal, right?
I consider myself an old school liberal. You have to make that distinction now because, the word woke, which started out as a good thing, being alert to injustice, and a lot of people get triggered by the word because when they hear it, they think of the old meaning, which was good.
Right.
Stay woke. But I'm sorry, language is a living, breathing entity. Words change and they migrate and they take on a different meaning. And woke now has to answer for or for people have just used the word to ascribe a number of extreme things on the.
It just wasn't
Joe
Joe.
Scarborough's night. His usual playbook, prompt Maher into trashing Republicans, fell flat. No matter how many angles he tried, Bill Maher refused to take the bait. Every time Scarborough tried to steer the conversation toward Republican missteps, it backfired. Maher flipped the script, turning the spotlight onto the political left and the media outlets that constantly prop them up, and Maher didn't pull any punches. He was sharp, unapologetic, and laser-focused in his criticism of what he sees as the left's increasing obsession with woke culture, an ideology Scarborough now seems to defend. You could feel the discomfort. Scarborough, a veteran broadcaster with decades under his belt, looked rattled, like he'd lost control of the narrative. He kept trying to change the subject, to pivot the conversation to safer ground, but Maher wasn't having it. He took the reins, and Scarborough was just trying to hang on. And it wasn't just Joe who felt the pressure. Maher also had pointed words for Vice President Kamala Harris. Her big challenge, he said, is convincing moderate voters that she's not just a stealth version of the worst excesses of the far left. He wasn't wrong. There's a chunk of the electorate that doesn't love Trump, but still thinks he's more grounded than the left-wing ideas that feel increasingly out of touch with common sense. No matter how carefully Harris frames her public image, the perception sticks. She's become too closely tied to the loudest progressive voices, those more focused on labels and identity than on delivering real results. And voters notice. They're not just reading headlines or listening to speeches. They're looking for leadership that feels real, practical, grounded, and not just symbolic. By refusing to put distance between herself and the party's extreme wing, Harris hasn't just hurt her own image. She's dented the entire Democratic brand. Last year's elections made that crystal clear. Americans are losing patience with performative politics. They want leaders who get things done. Sensing the shift, Scarborough made one last attempt to regain control of the conversation. You and I, he said to Maher, come from opposite ends, old school liberal, old school conservative, but we both feel stuck between two extremes. It was a plea for common ground, a last-ditch effort to pivot, and Maher agreed. That's why this audience is different, he said, because they're tired of being ideologically held hostage. Most Americans aren't represented by the loudest voices on either side. Whether it's race, economics, or foreign policy, Maher argued there's always a middle ground, if we're willing to look for it. In one particularly powerful moment, Maher brought up affirmative action and race. If you're white, yes, you've benefited from racism historically. That has to be acknowledged. But also, I didn't personally cause it. It's a complex issue, and that's the point. Maher isn't interested in easy answers or loyalty to a party line. He's interested in truth, even when it's uncomfortable. That's why people still listen to him. In a landscape where so many are locked into tribalism, Maher remains in the middle. Not because it's easy, but because that's where the real conversation lives, where solutions can be found, where nuance matters. And here's the thing, picking the middle path isn't weakness, it's strength. It takes real courage to think for yourself, especially when both sides are demanding your loyalty. That's what Bill Maher showed us. The value of independent thought. Thanks for tuning in. If you liked this breakdown, give it a thumbs up and hit subscribe for more straight talk with no spin. Catch you in the next one.